Hi, welcome to Manas Shil YouTube channel. Before we start, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you. Let's start the video. If you haven't watched the previous video, I'll link it in the description box, or you can click here. Tensura Volume 19. Chapter 3. The Royal Capital in Flames. Thoughts on enemy plans. The people of Ingratia, accustomed to a world of peace, were in the midst of a catastrophe that had come out of the blue. If Hinata were to be killed here, all the claims about the real culprit would be accepted. In that case, running away was one option. Why don't we just escape to Lubelius instead of foolishly going out there? Fortunately, the Holy Church in the capital has a transport team, and there is also a transfer spell if you pass through the suburbs. As long as Hinata-sama is safe, there can be many possible explanations later on, right? Cardinal Nicholas remarked, and Hinata agreed that it made sense. But she couldn't simply nod in agreement. It's impossible. We may be able to escape on our own, but we won't be able to take out the conference attendees, right? Once they're taken hostage, we won't have many other options. Everyone agreed with that. Exactly. Besides, let's not forget that the true enemy is not here. What would happen if the army of angels were to attack and the nation's key figures were killed? Upon hearing this, Nicholas frowned. I see, you are right. If that were to happen, the cooperation between the nations would be torn apart. At the very least, no country would trust the kingdom of Ingratia. I see, if that happened, we wouldn't be able to fight against the angels. Fritz muttered with a bitter expression on his face, as if he had been convinced. In conclusion, there was no choice but to do as Hinata said. Based on her beliefs, Hinata set out to do what she could for now. She did not want to save everyone, but if there was someone in front of her who could still be saved, she would reach out to them, because that was how Hinata lived. Hinata knew very well that this would in turn lead to trust in them. Well, I guess that's settled. Now, let's decide the division of roles. Hinata said as such, and declared that she would be Reiner's opponent. Tensura nodded in agreement. I will go with you. Now, as for the monsters. Without waiting for Tensura's words to finish, Arnaud and Fritz, who had become stiff and immobile, shouted. We do not need Tensura Dono's help. Please leave it to us. If it's a monster without an ego and no intelligence, we can fight them. The light attribute is a bit of a problem, but we've been trained in the labyrinth, so we'll show you what we can do. Hinata looked at the two of them with a frown. Why are they so conscious of Tensura Dono? She was taken aback, thinking that they were trying to look good in front of a beautiful woman. But the truth was something different. These two were truly scared of Tensura. If they didn't perform well here, they would be branded as useless. If that happened, it would be unclear what would happen regarding their special labyrinth training in the future. Besides, Tensura had many sympathizers, not just in the labyrinth. She also had followers among the members of the parliament, so there was a danger that they might lose their power to speak out in the future if they were not careful. This was how much Tensura's influence had increased, but Hinata did not know that this was the case, having lost interest in politics. For Tensura, this was a very important time. Despite Remuer's orders to make the World Conference a success, she had allowed the enemy to invade. On top of that, she was responsible for being unable to stop the destruction in the capital. Giving priority to human life was no excuse for that. Behind her smile, Tensura was burning with rage. That was why she approved of Arnaud and the others' suggestions. In that case, please do. I will lend you some of my subordinates and you can incorporate them into your unit. She told him as such, and went on to help Arnaud and the others. This was all in preparation for her own move. She left the command to Arnaud and the others, and gave them the task of restoring security to the capital. On top of that, she intended to strike the mastermind herself. Thus, the division of roles was decided. Well then, let's go now. We have to bring down the death penalty on those who have acted foolishly in this time of emergency. Hinata said coldly. She was going to get rid of Reiner here to clear her own name. And she would capture Elric and make him confess to his crimes. Or rather. Well, the evidence is irrelevant. Once all the criminals have been taken out, the right story will be in the hands of the victor. Is what Tensura said. This was a declaration that she would do exactly what the enemy was trying to do. Tensura was a demon who did not care about ethics, and she believed that, as long as she was the winner, she could do whatever she wanted. It was a very Tensura-like argument. And so, well aware that it was a trap, Hinata and the others headed to the stage, where the enemy was waiting for them. Once they were outside of the capital, they found things in a terrible state. Part of the royal castle in the center of the city had partially collapsed, spoiling its beautiful appearance. The aristocratic district, where the capital and the branch of the Holy Church were located, was relatively better, but the downtown area facing the main street of the city was on fire. It can't be helped that we prioritized evacuation, but this is going to be hard to clean up. Full-scale battles are still to come, and there will be more damage. With the loss of the king and his successor, it will take time for Ingratia to recover. Nicholas calmly responded to Hinata's murmur. It was a cold reaction, unbecoming of a priest. But that was Nicholas's normal behavior. For Nicholas, Hinata was the only priority, and he did not care about anything else. It was because he wanted to be of service to Hinata that he rose to the position of cardinal, the highest rank next to the pope. It is because he was such a man that he was still accompanying Hinata without regard for danger. Incidentally, there were 5 of them now. Hinata, Tensura, and Cardinal Nicholas, who had followed Hinata out of concern for her. These 3 were joined by Moss and Sien, who had been summoned. As they headed for their destination, they planned their strategy. Moss, you don't have to fight, just go into search mode and prepare for a surprise attack. Understood. Moss was a yes man. He obeyed Tensura without saying anything else. Even so, he would sometimes say unnecessary things and get into trouble, but as he had been Tensura's second in command for a long time, he knew how to take care of himself. This, Moss's search mode, was a kind of barrier of sorts. He dispersed his own fragmented clone into a hemisphere of 1 kilometer in diameter. This allowed him to react immediately to a surprise attack from 500 meters away. At first glance, this may not seem to be any different from universal perception, but that was not the case. That was because the speed of information transmission was much faster, and Moss's own analytical ability was also added to deal with enemy attacks. Moreover, 500 meters was a perfect distance for Tensura, whose perceptual speed could be increased by 1,000,000 times with her skill. Even if it was an attack at the speed of light, under the influence of Moss's search mode, there would be more than a second before the attack would hit the target, and it would be possible to deal with it. Of course, it was not possible to move at the speed of light, and this was merely extending the time being perceived, but Tensura would still be able to manage. Moss's search mode seemed to be perfect, but it had only one drawback. That was, Moss was in the most danger, because he was the one who would take the first hit. Even if I'm damaged by that surprise attack, I doubt she'll care. Although obedient, Moss still complained inwardly. Taking a glance at Moss's ability, Hinata saw through its nature. You are still wary of surprise attacks. So then, you're saying that the one making all the noise is a decoy. Tensura smiled when she pointed this out. That's right. In the first place, we could narrow down the enemy's objective when they targeted this conference. To divide the West, or to aim directly at Rimuru. The biggest opportunity for them is Hiro Masayuki, who has become the Emperor of the Eastern Empire, correct? Tensura's grin deepened as Hinata replied without a second thought. As expected of you, Hinata Dono. Rimuru-sama did approve of you. The flattery is nice. I'm sure it would be obvious to anyone who saw it. Not really, but that's fine. Tensura chuckled as she thought of the faces of the people she had conversed with recently. She had been under a great deal of stress, because many of them were not very perceptive. Those who did not listen to others were the worst. They would express their opinions only for their own benefit, and there were many times when they could not reach a consensus. Some of them would announce their agreements on their own after the meeting, and she had a good taste of the troublesome nature of political negotiations. There were even fools that the contract-oriented demon could not understand. Tensura made sure that such people knew their place, but she had always wished that they would not create unnecessary trouble for her. In this respect, her conversation with Hinata was quick and pleasant. That's exactly what Rimuru-sama's objective must be. I suppose so. There was an incident elsewhere at the same time as this ruckus, and Rimuru was headed there. They must have prepared a pretty big bait, right? Yes, that's correct. Tensura nodded. It had been agreed in advance that if Leon showed up, Rimuru would go. Tensura had been told this, but Hinata had guessed it without knowing about it. Tensura explained the situation to a certain extent, since she had already guessed so much. Upon hearing this, Hinata also pointed out some problems. It was a very pleasant conversation. I had heard that she was sharp, but I'd like to have her as my subordinate. Although, I'm sure Rimuru-sama would not approve. With Rimuru, just the fact that he allowed himself to be called by his own name suggested that Hinata was a special person. Moreover, when he was with Hinata, he seemed to return to his true self, and appeared to enjoy himself very much. Just by knowing Rimuru like that, it was the reason Tensura couldn't help but give Hinata a glance. It truly is enviable. However, I suppose I am honestly pleased that the woman Rimuru-sama recognizes is not a fool. Since ancient times, there had been numerous cases where a country had been turned upside down by a woman had as gained the favor of the king. In this respect, Hinata was not someone she had to worry about it. In the first place, Rimuru and Hinata were not lovers, so Tensura may have been thinking too much, but, surprisingly, there were many people who thought like that. The only ones who didn't know were the two people themselves. At any rate, right now they needed to know about the enemy's objective. Restoring Demon Lord Leon to his senses, and bringing him back to their side. That was their basic strategy. But of course, it was expected that the enemy would be aware of that goal. Feldway was smart enough to know that Rimuru-sama was the one who brought Valgrind-sama to her senses. If so, from Tensura's perspective, there was no doubt that Feldway was capable. Despite his many shortcomings, she was certain that he had a plan to deal with Rimuru. We should also assume that he has a winning strategy in mind when he used Demon Lord Leon as bait to lure Rimuru out. That's right. Tensura nodded in agreement. Of course, there was no way Rimuru could not see that. He must have been able to plan far ahead, seeing through the depths, so that even Feldway's plan would be swallowed. Rimuru-sama was aware of this, and went to rescue Demon Lord Leon. Tensura assured her with absolute confidence. Hearing this, Hinata tilted her head in concern. But perhaps the enemy only called him over because they believed they could win. They say that Michael has taken in the power of the true dragons, but can Rimuru really win against such a monster? Hinata's concern was understandable. From Tensura's perspective, it seemed impossible that Rimuru would be defeated. But that was not a question that could be answered at this stage, when they had not even seen the real enemy. What if Feldway or Michael were waiting for Rimuru at the destination? Well, I'm sure they'll take care of it though. Diablo and Sai were also there as escorts. She had no choice but to believe that Rimuru would be fine. If the enemy's goal was Rimuru, there was nothing for Hinata and the others to worry about. They could trust him, but the problem would be if the enemy had another objective. Although targeting the senators seems like a good idea, it's unlikely. I agree. There is no great advantage to splitting up the Western nations right now. If they were capable of defeating Rimuru, they wouldn't even bother with a united coalition of nations. The two agreed. After considering various other possibilities, they settled on the most likely conclusion. The enemy's target is Masayuki. So, where did His Majesty the Emperor disappear to? Hinata asked. At some point after the outbreak, Masayuki had disappeared from the capital. There were probably Imperial guards outside the capital, and the Scorched Dragon Valgrind was at Masayuki's side. Rather, it seemed to her that Masayuki was the safest one here. That's why she had left him alone, but it was a different story if the enemy's target was Masayuki. Perhaps Valgrind-sama realized what the enemy was after and evacuated the area. No matter what the enemy's intentions were, Masayuki's safety was the priority. Tensura knew that Valgrind would have thought the same. Then I guess it's safe to assume. It was at least better than defending themselves, Hinata agreed. If that was the case, the next thing to think about was their victory conditions. If the enemy's target is Masayuki, we're being used as bait, right? Do you think Masayuki will come to our rescue when we are about to be killed? Hinata had also known Masayuki before, so she knew that the boy was soft-hearted. However, since he had become an emperor, he should put his own life first, and she believed that he would be cool-headed about it. Tensura agreed with her. That's the main question. It is an unlikely assumption, but even if we were about to die, I don't think Masayuki Dono would come to our rescue. In this case, the problem was not just Masayuki's. Since Valgrind was attached to him, there was no doubt that Masayuki should be given priority. Hinata and Tensura agreed on this view as well. Therefore, the conclusion was also the same. Well, even if the people we're dealing with now only see us as bait, we have no reason to go along with them. You're right. Let's take out all of them, and lure out those who are hiding. In the end, winning would solve all their problems. With a shared awareness of the possibility of surprise attacks, Hinata and the others arrived at their destination. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy it.